Welcome everyone to our first episode of Where is My Diagnosis?
Where is it?
Where is it indeed? I'm Karen Gately.
I'm Kevin Gately.
I'm Carrie Gately.
Why not?
I'm Carrie Nunes.
And Carrie has obviously got quite an amazing story to tell, which is the topic of this podcast. But we thought the logical place to start would be, in fact, to understand who Carrie is as a person. We've had the pleasure of hanging out for, what is it?
Almost, 25, 26 years? 27?
Pushing the big 3-0.
Yes.
It's been a while. In recent times, spending lots of time together supporting Carrie through her latest battle. But Carrie, let's go back to
The good old days?
The good old days. Only you have the ability to actually laugh at your story, but that's part of the joy of who you are.
Part of my charm.
Indeed. Do tell. So tell us a bit about where your life story began.
It began on the east coast of Canada on a small little island. I was given up for adoption and abused by my adopted father. And that was all quite awful. And I ended up just running away, and I had a number of people sort of rallying and helping me, just, catching me when I fell. Like a woman who took me in when I was a 15-year-old runaway. And then I decided that I had to get out of Canada completely because there was just no healing there for me. And I spent a year, saved all my money up, and picked the furthest place I could possibly get, geographically speaking, that was relatively English speaking. I still learn the odd, phrase that you Aussies, weirdos, shorten everything, and the bilingual language that I'm still trying to grasp. But yeah, I picked Australia because I could not possibly get further away from where my life began, and then just had people rally in my defense, and we went up against the Australian Immigration Department way back in 1997, 98. And I ended up having...
Oh, that's quite a leap. So you're now going up against the Immigration Department. Why?
Oh, because...
So you've landed here in Australia.
I landed here, and I got off the plane, and I was just like, oh man. As I was walking, I arrived in Sydney, and then when I got off the plane, I realized that I didn't have that choking feeling of fear and looking over my shoulder all the time that I had in Canada my whole entire 20-year lifespan at that point. And that was a really significant moment for me, because I was just like, oh my God, there's another way to live. And once I tasted that, man, I just knew that this is where I had to, if I had any chance at having somewhat just a life that was better than
just safe.
Safe, and oh my God, it was safe. It was just freedom.
Yeah,
freedom.
So had you arrived on a holiday visa, or how?
Yeah, it was a working holiday visa, and it was good for a year. I think it was a year, and
So you're planning to wing it, kind of. Anyway,
I was winging
by the sounds of it.
Yeah, I had just really bad jobs. I was working at hostels and just places like cleaning and stuff like that. I was in Brisbane at one point. I was the entertainment manager. So I was working in the laundry by day, and then I had to put on my other hat at night and get on a bus with a bunch of drunks and stay sober and have all of these backpackers from all these different countries, and we'd take them to like a pub crawl.
Oh,
it was hell. That was the worst. No, it's so not me. It was bad.
Okay, so you've arrived in this amazing place. You're doing a shitty job or two, but you've decided I
this
want to
is where
stay
it's at.
safe. This is why.
Yeah.
So take us back now to this fighting with the immigration department.
Okay, so then I kind of developed this. I ended up in Melbourne. That's where I kind of built my life. So that's where my all my friends and relationships were formed. And then I had a friend who, well, I answered an ad in the paper for a flat, and I got it, and we became really close friends. And to this day, we're still really good friends. And she was just really supportive and everything. But then it's kind of a long story, but I eventually just wasn't able to work anymore because I didn't have the visa. And so I was running out of money, and then I couldn't stay where I was at with my friends. So I ended up becoming homeless. But then at this Young Women's Project in Oakley, they were rallying around me, and they said, well, if we go up against the Refugee Review Tribunal and argue that because of the abuse I suffered, I could argue that as a girl, that's the I don't know. So I can't remember. It was just, they said that that was it wasn't a minority group, but it was just kind of like being, a female. Yeah. And then
and I assume an at risk party that you experienced extreme abuse.
Yeah.
You're still vulnerable.
Yeah. And then they just claimed that if I was to have a chance at, living a life of, just purpose and just potential, that it couldn't be done in Canada, and I needed that distance.
Yeah.
Or like safety between us. And then I ended up getting pregnant in the middle of that Refugee Review Tribunal. And I just kind of kept that under my hat because, once you apply for one thing, oh, by the way, I'm just kidding. I'm just going to apply for, just spousal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
at this point, you're going for a refugee.
Yeah.
Status,
yeah.
Correct.
And I didn't even know that was possible, but they said, well, let's just see. And I mean, I guess by definition, I was never gonna fall into that category because, I wasn't gonna get my friends to, burn envelopes and send them over and say Canada's under attack, and like,
it's creating like a war.
Yeah, that's right. And then it just kind of it went from the refugee that in Canada, because I'm not a refugee, so that was always going to be thrown out, which it was. And they said, well, they don't doubt that I have very real fears of returning to Canada. They can't see a way for me to fit in the definition of a refugee.
Yeah.
So we knew that was going to happen, and then we appealed to the immigration minister at the time, who was Philip Ruddock. But I didn't love my chances because I remember at the same time there was a Chinese woman who was 9 months pregnant, and she was begging same government to allow her to stay in Australia until her baby was born, because under the one-child policy, they already had a child. So if she was to go back to China, it would be aborted, which is what happened. So he sent her back to China. And I was like, wow, I don't love my chances at all.
Yeah.
And I don't know, by the grace of the universe, Philip Ruddock intervened. So I had my baby in October 1999, and then
Were you married? Not that it matters, but just
I was living in sin for another 2.5 years.
Says he, who had exactly the same thing.
well, I just thought from the point of view of citizenship and all that kind of stuff, what does it mean and what does it mean?
Yeah, I don't think it mattered. So and for I don't know. So yeah.
So now you're in Australia. Mm-hmm. You've got your citizenship.
Not citizenship. I was October. I didn't even have Medicare, so I wasn't able to I was, going to have a baby, and I just thought, oh, do we have to boil water? And I have, just, it was bad. And so I was at a birthing center not far from here. I think it was in East Bentley at the time. And I went there, had my first child. I was 20, just turned 24. And then I didn't get, they told me it was in June of 2000 that they said that he had intervened in my case. And yeah, I was given a spousal visa.
Yeah.
So you got an even bigger lift of that monkey off the back.
Yeah.
Secondary boost. You would have been just off the ground.
Yeah.
Just floating a little bit above the ground.
So what you briefly mentioned was a childhood that obviously had very serious.
Yeah, it was subpar. It wasn't great.
You could say that.
Yeah.
And for any of our listeners, I do encourage you to go and get Carrie's book, Flying on Broken Wings, which tells, the story, obviously in a lot more depth than we have time for in this episode. But where I'm taking us to now is obviously there were very serious consequences for your health, your well-being, and obviously the journey that you then endured from that point where, okay, you're in Australia, you've had your first baby. Mm-hmm. Life wasn't suddenly then super easy for you. It's certainly been quite a journey from that point. Talk to us a bit more about that.
It was compared to what it was in Canada, it was pretty good. So had my baby, and for the next 2.5 years, I was just cruising and loving it, loving being a mom. And it was just certainly not what I expected to be doing at that age, but I was just really content and happy. And I had started therapy with one of the therapists who was in my corner, who helped to get me the refugee status, or have Philip Ruddock intervene in my case, which was successful, and I'm super grateful for that. And yeah, it was just, I was diagnosed as having complex PTSD with dissociation, just trying to get a grasp on what was my whole entire life. I just had all these gaps in my memory and stuff like that, and just would always spend a great deal of time covering and stressing about, okay, what do I do if I've lost time, or someone says, what did you say? And I don't remember saying something. And it was just awful. And I didn't. So then when I had a specialist who was explaining to me that this isn't crazy, it's just a result of severe trauma, it kind of helped me understand more of my own, I don't know, I guess just how I process, how my brain works. And then from there, I just have spent the last 27 years just understanding.
First 20 years.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Spent the last 27 years trying to understand the first 20 years.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. That's a good way of putting it.
Which obviously now brings us to here and now. Mm-hmm. And obviously the topic of this podcast, where's my diagnosis? So, and for our listeners, in this first episode, we're going to take you back to 2022, where Carrie was experiencing a great deal of pain, went through surgery, and, really we can define this point in time as the moment where her search for answers in terms of her health really began.
I like to call it the beginning of the end.
The beginning of the end. There's a clue as to why we called this episode the beginning of the end.
Yeah. I jumped the gun, sorry, but that's my first podcast.
But you can claim wisdom. Okay. That was yours. So Carrie, let's go to that moment in time. What first brought you to the hospital in 2022? Talk to us about what was going on with your health that caused you to go, I need to go and get this looked at.
At the end of 2021, I had moved house, and so it wasn't unusual to have a sore back. So I just kind of ignored it and just expected it to get better. And then, you know, Christmas came and went and it was still bad. It was getting worse. And then I remember lying in bed one day and I thought, oh, my back doesn't hurt that much. And then I felt this pain in my lower right quadrant. And then I just remember a friend of mine, her mom died of ovarian cancer. And then I just went, oh, I should probably get that checked. And so I made a call to my GP and she knew how I was just so, I never wanted to do any exams or especially like the really invasive ones. And she said that I had to go get an ultrasound and she said, don't worry, it's not going to be an internal one. Just, you know, I was like, okay, I can do that. So off I went and they said, oh, we see something and we're going to need to do an internal. I'm like, oh, of course you are. So I allowed that. And then they said that I had a large mass. It was found in it's called the right adnexa region, which is, I guess that is where the, you know, your right, like for females is your fallopian tube, your ovary, and just the tissue around that, I guess. And
was that the only symptoms you were having with just the
sore back
pain and then
and the back pain? So I remember just before I went to hospital, I was standing in the kitchen with my youngest and she was just making a coffee. And I was just like, oh, it feels, because I've had back pain before and I was struggling with it, you know, in in 2017 and earlier, just lower back, and then my neck in 2018 and 19. And it was different. And it was
that's what I was wondering, because obviously we remember those days of you lying on the floor while the rest of us are partying.
Yes, yes.
So, you know, obviously your back had been one of the physical consequences of the trauma as well. How is this different?
Well, I always struggle with lower back issues, with sciatica and stuff like that. So I didn't know that it was any different, but as it progressed, it hurt to breathe. I just had this sharp pain, and there was a pain in my upper back in the middle, and it was like nothing I'd ever had before. So I agreed to the exam, and they found that mass, which my doctor rang me and she said, you need to get to hospital. And I just went, no, I don't want to go to hospital. And then she said, well, this is what you have and she said it was an abscess in my right fallopian tube. And if that bursts, that can be really serious and you need to get to hospital. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm not going to go. And then she said, you could die. And so I was like, okay. So
probably take that.
Off I went. Yeah, if I have to. I was like, I can't just jump on one foot and have it pop out, but it doesn't work that way. So, I ended up at the Royal Women's, and they put me on really strong antibiotics on a drip, IV drip, and it didn't do anything. I think I was there for 3 or 4 days, and then the gynae team wheeled me down for surgery, and they ended up opening me up and taking lots of pictures and then closing me up and not doing anything, and then saying to me that they found this really cool rare tumor in my appendix. And then they were showing they were banging on about it, and just I was still really groggy and annoyed. And then they said and they were showing me all these pictures of my appendix, and I was just looking, and I just remember it just being this white, big, large, and it's supposed to be this really skinny sort of appendage off of your cecum, and mine was really distended. And they were just, again, really excited, and I was really angry because it was still there. They closed me up and they said, oh no, it's colorectal.
And is that okay, because they were
gynae
in that area?
Yeah. So I mean, it made sense, but it was still annoying.
Yeah,
because I had to have another surgery. And at that point, I mean, I think my previous surgery was a 2007 ACL reco.
Yeah.
So my health has never been an issue.
Yeah.
So then I had to go back to the hospital, and they opened.
How long was that between?
I think 5 days.
Yeah. Okay.
So
straight away.
Yeah. Straight away. Back to emergency. And then they admitted me under the colorectal ward. And I remember going through and just seeing colorectal, and I was like, oh, why am I here? Gross. It's my appendix. So I didn't really have a grasp of the anatomy at that point. So that was awkward. So yeah, it was just me and a bunch of old people with problems with their colon.
So they
So it was fun.
Yeah.
So you go in again. Do they now remove that tumor? Is that the next step?
They removed the tumor, the appendix, and part of my cecum because the tumor was growing up into the cecum.
Right.
And so I was there for another couple days recovering from that. And then I was discharged and sent home. And they just said that, just keep it easy and light for the next 6 weeks. And
had they, while you were in the hospital?
They said, don't worry, it's not going to be cancer.
Okay, so they thought it was going to be?
It'll just be benign. Mm-hmm.
So you've gone home without that diagnosis, is that right?
Yeah.
And then, so at what point do you then find out?
9 days later, I get called in to Royal Melbourne because that's where the tumor was removed. And a young colorectal doctor told me that it was a lamin, which is a low-grade appendiceal mucinous neoplasm. So it's a 1 in a million rare mucinous neoplasm.
So help us understand what's the mucinous?
Well, the appendix is just full of goop and mucin. So mucin's kind of like snot. Can you say snot on podcast?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm so impressed that I've stayed away from all the swear words, but snot became so it just, for lack of a better term. So they call it mucin, but it just looks like goopy snot, really. Yeah. And that's what the tumor is. It's a mucinous tumor. So most tumors are solid, but this one isn't. Okay. It's mucin. It's like snot. Yeah. So I don't know the significance of it.
A bunch of phlegm floating around.
Yeah, in my body. Charming.
Nice.
Well, you should always spit it out.
and that's, I kept swallowing and it ended up in my appendix and then burst. So kids, don't do the.
But
I won't do it.
Let's not do that.
Don't do it at all.
So we've got the diagnosis. It's this rare appendix tumor.
Yep.
You've had it removed.
Uh-huh.
They send you off, and now what? Like, what's the plan?
Yeah, good question. So she just didn't really make a whole lot of sense. So it kind of just seemed like she didn't know what she was talking about, really.
Is this the surgeon, sorry?
No, it was the young colorectal doctor who gave me the diagnosis.
Okay.
So I just sat there and she went through it. She said, well, you have a low-grade cancer, and so we removed the appendix and part of the cecum, and you also had I think she called it a sessile serrated lesion. It was an incidental finding that they removed as well on the cecum. And that didn't mean anything to me at the time. And then she said that there'd be a 20% chance that the cancer comes back in the same spot. I went, where you took the appendix? And she said, yes. I went, okay. And didn't say anything else about it going to other organs, just said that it would grow back in the same spot. And so, I don't know, like just the more, and then she just asked me about my history and stuff. And I kind of went into, I'm kind of not surprised that I was given a diagnosis of cancer, because I kind of always expected that was going to happen given where I'm from. Because.
So tell us the quick story on that one.
Well, it's a really poor part of Canada, and there was a lot of the people working there worked in coal mines, a steel mill. I think it's called a steel plant. And there was, like, I think 100 years or 120 years ago, they had the coke ovens. And I don't really know what all that means, but like, again, all around coal and stuff like that. And then all the sludge. Have you seen Aaron Brockovich? Mm-hmm. So kind of like that. So like all the stuff just goes into the Sydney Harbor. So I was born in Sydney, Nova Scotia, all kind of poured into the water. And my street, when I was growing up, the harbor was at the end of my street. So our water came directly from there. And my mom developed breast cancer when I was 4. It spread to her lymph nodes. Two of her friends died of cancer, one of ovarian, one of breast cancer, a couple of men on the street, prostate and something else. And then my 14-year-old babysitter at the time died of leukemia. So cancer was everywhere.
Yeah.
So I wasn't surprised. I just kind of thought I knew I'd be young. I just didn't think I'd be 46. I thought I'd be like, maybe 60 or something like that. Yeah.
So you had some pathology reports where you saw some inconsistencies. So tell us about that. What did the initial pathology reports say, and how did that contradict with what you had been told?
Well, yeah, nothing contradicted at the time because I was just so ignorant to the medical.
Yeah.
But then the more inconsistencies and people not really, because appendix cancer is so rare, like I said, it's a 1 in a million diagnosis, known as an orphan disease. So there's no funding, there's no research. You kind of get that and you're on your own. We don't have a calendar. We don't have a race or a walk. It's just kind of like you just get that and it's just you're on your own. So the initial pathology stated that it was like I said, a low-grade cancer. But what I didn't know at the time is it also had that where they just kind of overlooked high-grade features. Pseudostratified nuclei with papillary structures and fibrosis, as well as infiltrative properties, like the mucin was seen outside of the appendix. It had perforated multiple sections, as well as, like I said, the cecum was infiltrated, and all of those are high-grade features, but yet I was given a low-grade diagnosis. And also, I didn't know it at the time, but when you have a tumor in 2 organs at once, and I think just with cancer anyway, you do this thing called IHC and molecular staining to work out the organ of primary origin and to work out the subtype of cancer, because a lot of different cancers have subtypes, like your breast cancers, and even appendix has about 4 or 5 different types of cancers. Like there's the high grade, the low grade, there's goblet cell, and there's signet ring. So you need the staining to work out what type of cancer you have, or if there's even mutations. That's what staining is used for, but yet there was no staining conducted.
Is the staining done on biopsies?
Yes.
Yeah.
So like even to diagnose something properly, you need staining.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And taking biopsies, because would these things show up in the bloods? Like you do a blood test, like you can do blood tests now for melanoma and that sort of stuff. Anyway.
Yeah. They say that sometimes it doesn't show up in bloods. Like it's a really tricky cancer because a lot of it isn't if it is just the lamin that I was diagnosed with, that doesn't often show up in bloods or even on scans initially. So it's there's a lot of places for it to hide, and because it's a low grade cancer, it's kind of a slow burn and it doesn't really impact the bloods or the tumor markers. So that was my understanding. But then, like I said, then I had high grade features that began to, I don't know, just my trust started to wane, and then along with my declining health, I just kept getting sicker and sicker, and nothing was making any sense.
Indeed. And that's obviously where we're going to go in the episodes ahead, is to unpack more and more of the journey and present all of those moments in time and discrepancies and things that just, again,
yes,
leave us with far more questions
than answers.
Because obviously, dear listeners, we've been talking to you about the middle part of the story, we're going to go back in time in future episodes as well. But, since 2022 to now, Carrie still does not have a diagnosis. She's still experiencing extreme and worsening symptoms, how much weight she's lost. So obviously we love her dearly and believe that she needs and obviously deserves to understand what her body is doing. So thank you for listening today. If you want to support Carrie on her search for answers, follow her on Instagram and X, or visit her website where you can view the evidence for yourself. We'll be uploading documents as we go. We invite medical experts to dive into some of those reports and images that we'll share and comment on any inconsistencies in any of those various reports. Don't forget, if you want to understand more about Carrie's journey, then go check out her book, Flying on Broken Wings. Thanks for joining us. Okay, on that lovely note, we're going to wrap things up and join us next time.